Oh, you didn't see this. Moving picture status. Yeah, that was yesterday. Like, Friday. Yeah, you aren't ever gonna find it. I mean it. Like, here it is. From whence it came, can't touch it. It literally vanishes. But basically what I'm saying is, it literally vanishes. You can't touch it. So like, you can see I did it myself. And I've done it before. And maybe someday I'll do something. It probably won't be this. But, you know, I can't give it away. Like, there's any number of things you can't get your hands on about moving picture status from whence it came. Definitely can't get it on from like the Holy Spirit gravities. That stuff ain't happening. But long story short, those statuses, they're basically older than freaking circulatory systems, basically. But you might think of it as veins. You might think of it as veins. I'm not talking about, somebody might have been thinking about veins for other reasons. I myself might have been thinking about veins on other subjects, but this is a totally different subject. So, veins, why specify? Veins are different for different types of creatures, different types of things, but veins aren't as old as moving picture status reduction, disappearing stuff. That stuff is old. Old. Before we design skeletons, moving picture status says no. All the time. Always. Moving picture status is like, that shit could veto the best answers for the best reasons, and it'd still be like, no. So anyway, you can see this happened yesterday. You didn't see it. You can't run with it, and it isn't going to be going anywhere for degenerative anti-moving picture status function. So you can see I did it. Nobody else did it. There wasn't anybody else that did this. I did this Friday. But you aren't ever going to be able to touch it. You aren't ever going to be able to touch what I did there. Like, you're not going to find it at the final place. You're not going to find it at the strongest place. You're not going to find it where it's all yours. You can't get your hands on it. You just can't do it. Moving picture status, what it up? That's it. So what am I talking about here? So clearly vascularity just itself is like a majorly dynamic, functional, you probably can't hold train of thought to accomplish anything under pressure. You have to plan, you have to lay out, you have to antiquate. There has to be answers backwards and forwards for every one of the answers that are going to hold. And every one of those answers that are holding, they're going to support moving picture status and vice versa. So they kind of have a marriage always. Doesn't really matter how many types of vascularities, doesn't really matter how many types of moving picture statuses, doesn't really matter how many types of worlds, doesn't really matter how many types of ideas. That's the issue, because they're always going to be in a marriage, and how they function, dude, you could spend forever and not ever solve it. You could spend forever and not ever solve it. So this kind of goes back to, I talk about moving picture status. You don't know your head from a hole in the ground about it in all time. That's fine. That's not the point. If I'm directing survival and I'm talking about moving picture status, what do I want to see? I want to see, look, that's a big subject. That's a big idea. Clearly we're not covering it all. And clearly there's not everything that needs to be focused on. It's just sort of an appreciation. The subject can go anywhere. It maybe goes nowhere. And the learning maybe doesn't produce anything that's good for anything or bad for nothing. And so all those ideas about that I was going over previously. No longer wants to eat types of things. Okay? So you see moving picture status. You see, can't get your hands on it. You see, you can't bank on a final type. And nobody is going to the lottery. Nobody's going to the casino and putting all logically and putting all their bet on they can depend on a final answer near to moving picture status. Nobody is going to do that, okay? I've maybe been the most rational person ever about the idea every time I ever exist. And I maybe care the most sometimes about any number of things, like don't waste your time ruining your life, or like don't waste your time like betting on things that you can't win with, or don't waste everybody's time drawing us into like poor focus types of things, because that doesn't eat appreciation. And what I was talking about, what do I want to see if I'm holding survival as a director? I want to see that moving picture status, okay, it's a big subject. We aren't going to be accomplishing what we need for our minds or our health if we're pulling, like, we need to go back. 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 And that's what we'd expect, not to care about us learning. Look, vascularity, there's a lot of reasons why somebody might be coming to appreciate things about that. Maybe it's the things you see, maybe it's the things we have to touch, maybe it's the things that I'm doing, maybe it's something that somebody else is doing, where we're drawing focus, how we're pulling together, anywhere along the lines. There's going to be a lot of reasons why vascularity plays in to the mind or learning in time. Simple appreciations, simple go-to ideas a lot of times. You got a lock, you got a full, you got a mandate types of things. So you would expect where there's proverbial criticality is sort of a de facto diagnosable, like ahead of time, like, we're moving through some lofty waters here in the coming days and months. This is an example. We're moving through some lofty waters here in the coming days, and we're not really going to have our heads around all the moving picture statuses, so why don't we just go ahead and pre-diagnose ourselves? We'll give ourselves a little booster seat here, and we'll just say that, as we're learning and feeling things out, we're probably going to be making some boo-boos, and we're probably going to be like talking adrift or like drawing circumspection into places that we're not exactly defending properly. I can't exactly speak a lot about it because then I'll just ridicule myself into another type of disaster, and I'll just have to be born again, because the excuses are just going to flare up and they're going to defeat the point that somebody is there with the mastership near to moving picture statuses. So like, what do you learn? Well, you can't probably depend on any population to hold their tongues and shut their mouths and not invite problems from space whenever they realize, what? Moving picture status probably has the power, since it's older than vascularity, probably has the power to like born something that nobody can really get. You know what I'm saying? So like, somebody like produces a major production, maybe it's like an entire way of doing business, right? And they're working out all the kinks and nails and joints and like forgivenesses and things, and then bam, somebody kills them. Okay, that moving picture status can probably just born them again. It isn't in anybody's bank, and it isn't working for anybody with a mind. It's working for the moving picture status at a negative pressure that's relative to airlocks. And that negative pressure is going to push until there are balances and circulations of other types of vascularly defined systems that recognize where there are pressure defaults that are being taken to war. So for instance, I have pressure defaults that an entire country depends on. Nobody can work on them today. They doesn't have the skills. They doesn't even know what they look like. They wouldn't know what to do even if they saw a piece of one. So what do? Well, as a moving picture status, maybe I start getting people ready to try and get them to work, or I start getting them ready to start focusing, or I start pitching in resources to making the problem look a little bit different in time, because it impacts survival pictures, it impacts relationships and investments and other types of satiable relationships. So sciences, they're all interdependently confused about how moving picture statuses always work. And so as an investigator, you're basically lost at sea in lofty waters when it comes to moving picture statuses that are heavier than time at any point in time. So the point, bottom line here is, you can see that I did this. Nobody else did this. Where the moving picture status holds when I did this, you can't get to it. You can't hold it, you can't make it, you can't finalize it. It's all held in negative pressures in all-time survival planings. So, from ideas like that, other types of vascularities may become created in time, and then you get other inverse proportions of why those things aren't ever going to be subject or risked, which basically amounts to other types of plateaus. So, for instance, look, you have your space and we have our space. And because of vascularity, well, you can't reach a tipping point where we lose. I won't force you to lose, and you aren't going to force me to lose. It's created, it's invented, it's existed forever. We aren't going to push each other to lose. But clearly, what we are and our behavior and how we live and how we care and what we have time for, they're all major factors in how we can live and make time for and be happy and things along these lines. But if they aren't ever ideas that are making sense, like, I need vascularity, I can't touch it all. I need motion picture status, I can't touch that all either. I need it to be defended, and I can't even design all of it. I need things. But I realize there's sort of distant focus pressures from maybe like what I was already feeling good about, or what I was already not forgotten of. And so when I was talking about reasonability, okay, I have to look at who was reasonable when I talked about reasonability, and I have to dissect it and investigate it as a moving picture status, at least. I have to study the vascularity of it forever. And I isn't going to be everywhere to make all the decisions about everything having to do with all of it, okay? But the point is, if somebody were insincere about that, they don't want me to lose, and I'm not going to force them to lose. Maybe there's an integrity between us. If that wasn't sincere, if that was like a big fat lie, I would recognize it in moving picture statuses. And it wouldn't be really clear what would be happening where the truth is happening. So like, the Lord giveth and the Lord taketh away once again. These things happen in time. And here is one place where they were bound to happen. That's the point. Nobody in their right mind is going to give somebody a key to wield a tool to own what this meant, why it was safe, why nobody could get their hands on it, and why it was a part of vascular stabilities in proportion to amidst all times and all places. Certainly nobody's going to give them that just to pantomime why the white race is something that's going in a pocket. Clearly somebody's not going to be doing that to be capitulating chopstick at any point in time to making sure that that's why everything's going in one side of a pocket or another. There's too many relationships that are interdependently numb to why they matter and why anybody needs them and why they're healthful and why there's God's promises and time's promises and moving picture status dependabilities, so on and so forth. There's clearly a lot of facts, but people that look at immunology or science or the flow of time that doesn't always have these types of perspectives, and they aren't gonna, because some of them just aren't going to be capable of having them. And if I draw that into concussion in front of space, well, maybe I'm forcing them to lose something, or I'm forcing them to be more or less opaque to what we are as a world. You know, how sharp does anybody need to see all our relationships? Maybe, maybe not. Maybe there's things we need to stand behind. Maybe I believe in that. maybe how clear everything about us becomes. Maybe I'm not so believing in how clear we all need to be in front of space, okay? If we're doing something and we're saying something and it's something that we isn't breaking the bounds of and it's like a life or death forever type of scenario, maybe there needs to be some clarity there. Maybe there needs to be some actual artifact and pressure and truth that is anchoring and proportion things. But there's other things that maybe doesn't need to be so believable at clarity at any point in time. But maybe now I wouldn't believe in an expert about it, probably almost no matter what. Okay? But I certainly wouldn't probably be believing in one where this didn't matter. This wasn't some sort of factual anomaly, maybe a little bit atypical, something that has been like, but you don't realize, like, an idea, any idea, you might feel it has a worth because it's rare or because it's important. Somebody maybe doesn't care at all. It just needs it to function in a vascularity so that it can get back to whatever it was doing in time. So, where I create, and you know I created it. Good, when you created moving picture statuses for vitalities, isn't that the time when, like, blood would be invertedly perverted anytime anybody ever comes to discover anything about it because they probably doesn't care about an idea? Isn't that when that would happen, God? Isn't that how that would probably go down? And if somebody really did eliminate something that was super important, wouldn't moving picture status just, like, wreck something and keep on trucking until the balances are restored and the negative pressure statuses? Well, how would that, isn't that, yeah, probably. It's probably exactly what would happen. So I'm going to talk about panhangelic forces here for a minute. So, like, you probably can't comprehend what it isn't costing you because I've already paid for this. When I mention these things, they're totally caked in impossibility. It doesn't mean you couldn't live through it. It doesn't mean you couldn't learn something from it. But what it means is there are definitely things that already recognize this is taking it out of forever. Oh, that's just not happening. Any amount of eyes getting in there to ever see it, that's just not happening. Here's the point. I place a pressure limit on moving picture status. Problems aren't going to happen because there isn't going to be a diagnosis of the moving picture status that's created. There might be a diagnosis by something, but it isn't happening in there. The diagnosis is happening some other place, which means it can be eliminated because it's probably wrong, because there probably shouldn't be any amount of diagnosis. There's pre-appreciation, and then there's sentiment and sentimizables and sympathies and empathies and atrophies and utilities. There's all kinds of ease. That's the point. Where the eyes can't get in to see it, there isn't problems coming back out. See, to measure the truth of what is holding in things that is older than vascularity definitions and designs, things can't be getting in. Because if they could get in, they could get out. So, it isn't clear who all has been a survivor, because that has been an impossibility because of the things that only somebody that you know does something is the only one that does it. Nobody else has done it. See? And here's the one that you might not like, because, I might be able to operate from moving picture status quite a lot in life, but you look at where I am and what I'm working on and what the things that I do and what I learn about and put into the universe. I can't exactly be writing about motion picture status. I have skills, I'm good, I'm developed, and I'm super sophisticated. But, as important as moving picture status is to anything, the way I balance and the way somebody wants to write about how I balance, I wouldn't do that. I wouldn't do that. See, I had to know you, what you would need to have and how we could do it together safely. That's what I had to know. I can't be working on the trees and the dirt and the sand. I can't be working on those things and then shift over to moving picture status and somebody just be writing about it like it doesn't mean anything. See, I have to hold my mind where I work on the trees and the dirt and the sand because they're special and they have special places. And the way I feel about moving picture statuses are special and they have special places. And the way other people need what I know or can touch or can do, some of these things can't be breaking. And it isn't clear why those things is ever going to be less than the vascularity that anybody else thinks that everybody needs at any point in time, because they amount to eyes that are trying to go in someplace so that something can come out so they doesn't ever have to touch it ever again. See, that isn't moving picture status. Did you hear that pop there? It sounded like this, but it was higher. So you might not ever have heard that, but what I did was no, it wasn't a tree falling in the woods. But that's the point. Any number of scientists that have resulted in needing enumerations of moving picture status, they maybe see it similar to a tree falling in the woods, in the register, in the radar, in the math sets. But it isn't it. It's something else. And it might not ever be clear what it is the point. Because we're so different and so unique and so specified. When I look at the tree in the dirt and moving picture status, well, that doesn't need to be going anywhere. It needs to be going somewhere that nobody's getting their hands on. And everybody else that works from the sciences specifically, maybe a tree falling in the woods is good just enough so that they can do what they need to do safely and they isn't posing problems for our vascularities. So maybe it doesn't ever really need to be clear what I just did, just as I was talking right here. You see the idea? There's maybe a lot of reasons or applications why that would ever be true, but clearly it has to come from somewhere. So what do people get from this? What people get is things like, you shouldn't go somewhere without your dad, because I'm going to recognize it and put a stop to it. Because what happens is, on subjects like this, people go a distance at a speed at a weight, and they maybe doesn't know exactly what the heck they're doing when they do it. And I doesn't want to have to chase them. I doesn't want to have to make the world chase them. And clearly, that isn't something that people need to be having happen. But these types of excuses, like why would they even be something? You see, why would these types of excuses even be something? So the idea is that, I mentioned these things, and I mentioned them with survival, and I mentioned them with a priority of some size and truth and time. But, I realize, maybe I navigate stuff, maybe I love stuff, maybe I do things that are important, but I know in my head that some subjects, maybe come in good in small doses. Small doses is maybe good because you maybe get a taste of it, you maybe get something to maybe think about or spend some time with, and you isn't, hopping on and making yourself a conductor of electricity just because you hear a special type of idea anytime it ever happens, or there's a connection somewhere. There's a special type of connection. And why? So look, there's me in the world, moving picture status. It can't be replicated. Nobody can recreate me and own the scientific data. They can't go back and say, Now it's their turn to talk about vascularity and be more important than all time. They can't recreate me. So there's survival pressure because of moving picture status that is created because of impossibility, and it stabilizes any number of types of relationships that is paying for any amount of time for any number of people to do any number of things that they isn't thankful for, they isn't caring about, or they is being neglectful of facts that, they can't do it, they can't help it, they can't make it, they can't math it, and yet they still need to function too. And so what can they do? What can they care about? What can they be a part of? So these pressures are very precious. And so as they flow in time, maybe there's some reconciliation, or there's some harmony, or the harmony, or maybe there's some peace or some pacification that happens through time. But then on the other hand, there's those flows, and I know, as mighty as my sight or my hand or my heart or knowing time might ever be, I know in my head it isn't always the best idea to just keep navigating, to just keep going, to just keep furthering stuff. And so I try to be mindful of this, but when I said, why would that even be an excuse? Why would that even be an excusable focus? Why would that even be something that would be? Those types of questions, where they are being, it isn't simple to diagnose where the differences of course of living are hurting one another. And that is definitely not a good combination whenever somebody is working on moving picture statuses that are superiorly important. Okay? And it maybe isn't clear that anybody ever really needs to really truly experience why that is ever true, unless it's time for them to experience why that is true. And it's a very difficult thing to work or plan or remedy in time. So maybe somebody looks at the things that I've been doing, and they say, oh, well, why is it something that we should respect? And it's like, I'm not enough. Time isn't enough. The things they've learned isn't enough. They need a hardcore, rational, what can't they beat with a weapon history. And that's all they're going to get before they turn to the side and say, okay, we'll go a different direction, until they see that they're absolutely lost types of things. And other things, maybe they just wonder, they've wondered for a long time, or maybe somebody actually needs to learn something, because maybe there's on a path where there isn't much mischief in possibility, and maybe, they isn't equipped the same way we're all equipped. And maybe, when I'm doing something specific, maybe it's possible there is some sort of opportunity for some sort of growth of the development. Like I said, Castle is very specific whenever it figures out what people need, whenever opportunities present themselves because things are successful, or things are accomplished, or appreciations are ongoing, or importantly held, and they're maybe somewhat dependable. Things can happen. Things can change. And so, that's the problem. I work on something that is a pressure that my castle can't quantify. And it's something that's specifically important. And maybe my castle says, oh, well, when it comes to moving picture status, there may be some appreciations that could happen that could maybe, relieve some types of pressures that have been seen in time. But it isn't really clear any of those changes is being thanked for stabilities in time. Ergo, why give somebody the keys to try and make those changes addressable with the science? Because they're going to complicate how simple moving picture status and panhangelic forces exist in proportion to stabilities that are consistently dependent on time and 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 time. So it's a difficult subject, very difficult subject to work through and make decisions about in rationalities and for presses. How is
the world's mental fortitudes going to rationally reduce pressures that minds face as the world is changing? How's the world ever going to do this? So that you doesn't have to go and get in the vehicle and make it happen. So that you doesn't have to go every single time and be there every time it happens. How is the world going to do this? Should there be an answer? Is any answer healthy? It's very old questions, and very important ones. So take a good look while I relax myself, where there probably couldn't be any more excuses about anything, and why people just aren't happy to be a part of life. Now, what is I talking about with a castle? Well, a castle is a gravity. A castle is a gravity that is very, very, very heavy gravity, and maybe next to nobody can force the change of that gravity. For example, I told you I didn't want my work to be a steeplechaser. I didn't want my work to be a totem pole. I didn't want it to be something that is a pole position for argument that is ruining life in time. I have very specific visions and specifics that I am working to address with my work. Now, I was working. Moving picture status wasn't even a subject on the radar where I was. Maybe it was a close subject. Maybe my castle even thinks I need some appreciations in moving picture status I didn't have before, or maybe somebody else does. But the point is, when I was working, moving picture status wasn't a focus, wasn't at a preemptive, wasn't maybe complicating from my holiness. See, my holiness wasn't complicating the planet with moving picture status in a lot of dimensions. Time passes. I'm moving away from my work. Moving picture status is maybe complicating any number of things around the world plane. A castle gravity is going to have very, very, very specifically particular renderings that are happening at rates that nobody is really seeing the whole picture of. And it's very difficult to go back and know why any number of things that change amidst those things in time. So what I'm saying is, it isn't really queer. We're learning about moving picture status is what the world needed today. The world maybe needs it today because of where we've come and what would be good because of what we know to anchor what shouldn't be or what couldn't possibly be, or draw conclusions about what couldn't be investing in certain places. And maybe a castle is the best at knowing these types of questions. But my holiness and what isn't looming into creating more complications, well, it's been irrevocably shifted and changed from what it might have been if I had just continued my work as I was continuing my work. It's a different day. It's a different reality. All of space-time has changed because of the change from my work moving into moving picture status. Space-time has changed. So what would you realize? If I have to get somewhere that only I could be, and I do something that only I could do, and it's clear nobody else has done it, I is the one that has done it. If I have to get there, when I get there, how many moving picture status ruin problems do I need to be facing if I am going to survive? If I'm going to help stabilize static pressures, how many complications of moving picture status do I need? Anything that has entered and exited and doesn't ever need to come back to care for you ever again, well, there's maybe no more important question that they're ever going to try to ask themselves and escape with the answers with. And that's really it. Because they doesn't live in your world, they doesn't habitate it, they doesn't think of it the same, and they isn't worried about any of the archaeology that relates to you. Because their major focus is probably transposing genetics, transposing spasm on top of genetic substrate to mask why you aren't getting the holiness delivered in some form to address why moving picture statuses are older than vascularity about the planes that you depend on to come to focus on problems that ever need addressed about mind frames of an entire world. So the point is, why you'd ever feel this question, that's one thing. What I'm saying is, why would the world need you to feel this question? Because I don't believe the answer is simply because I've been doing work that is superiorly important. I'm doing work that's superiorly important, okay, great, wonderful. But I doesn't believe that excuses anybody needs to be working on moving picture status questions. I doesn't believe that's the answer. You know, you probably never thought it would be possible that the biggest, strongest people of your world, it's possible somebody does something that's very, 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 very important. And on the other end of the spectrum, there's the biggest, strongest person of the world. You wouldn't think that it's possible that that person can't open their mouth. You wouldn't think that it's possible that person can't see right. You wouldn't think that it's possible that that person can't covet certain things, because it just isn't possible for them to do. So what do you realize? When it comes to moving picture status, focus of impossibility and displacement of priorities is maybe a very substantial probability to occur near to such focus, whether somebody is thinking about it or somebody is drawing on experience or trying to learn from history. Meaning, soft, appreciative glances at moving picture status, they're clearly not a novelty. They're clearly very much a delicacy in time. And, you know, maybe my castle might look at something like that and say, you know, he's doing something. The castle is doing something. And maybe there's some people that appreciate delicacy, because delicacy doesn't happen all the time. And in survival, there are clearly reasons why delicacy might be useful or good, maybe cooperative or productive, symbiotic. You know, castle's going to be defining symbiotic like crazy, and that's the other problem. There can't be anybody getting in there to where the symbiosis findings are truly relevant, because those findings are superseding any number of aspects of heavenly bodies. You know, if I'm a holy spiritual warrior and me and heaven have a relationship, clearly there's some intricate relationships of genesis and stabilization that happen, and there's yields because time allows for it and survival allows for it. But when you get to delicacies and fixation of probabilities and satiable substrates, there's going to be a lot of question, sequence, pressure, finder, reader relationships. They definitely basically go over the head of everything. Like, the least amount of excuses for anybody to ever design from it. The least amount of excuses for anybody to ever feel anything about it. Because it just you wouldn't ever be able to think about it. people wouldn't be a part of time as they ever dealt with it, and that isn't ever going to hold to be trusted in the castle itself. So, when it comes to sciences that a castle is most hesitant or reluctant to ever want to see survive, I mentioned can't have science in the castle. This is a prime example of how peculiar these types of, we're going on an adventure. We're going to learn something. We're going to see something. Maybe I have interests, maybe heaven has interests, maybe survival has interests, but none of these interests really matter to, do you have any idea how stable what I'm saying has to be, just so nobody can touch things as they're happening, just so nobody has a direct read of any of these types of questions? If there's delicacy that's being produced, then it's production. That doesn't mean anybody has a one-to-one relationship with the data. It doesn't mean anybody has a one-to-one relationship with what anything might be possible because of such data. It doesn't mean anybody has that relationship. Because any of those relationships, they aren't trustable to navigate what happened to the big white cock. What happened to it? Anyway, you can't simply add possibility to produce a result. And that's sort of the point. And it's definitely a volatile statement, but it's one I've clearly fallen in love with when it comes to holding production, that, we're going to get there the right way. We're going to figure it out together. We're going to hold how we can. You might look at it another way. I already knew the roads and the longitudes and the heartthrobs and the investments in the care that I live and remedy and produce and create. I already knew these things. It doesn't really require a lot of conflict from anybody that's trying to survive in any walk of life. But you might see that from the time I work on my work and the time that it kind of shifts to motion picture status, whether I knew we didn't need to be enemies of one another, or it's obvious as these pressures accumulate in time, all the infinite displacements of excuses are dwindling down to zero gravity in proportion to expectancy of these types of phenomenons. And I would never trust it. I would never believe in it. I'd have to create solutions from the possibilities so that I could later on visit what doesn't line up with possibilities that we need. Because everything I've said about motion picture status rests on it, because it's heavier than vascularity. So, it'd be the hardest thing for anybody to ever feel is, well, I've walked and I maybe highlighted some of the things that I have clearly done. And it's a big difference than the pressure is simply escalating because of generation of potentiate in proportion to banking of inversions of responsible navigation. It's a big difference. It's probably the hardest thing to ever feel, because it's probably the least trusted phenomenon to ever let anybody feel, because it means so much. So I'll say something else. No, I won't. Sometimes life is a lot of Well, these answers are incredible, and the way I see with them is vital, and the things I can do from the conclusions are paramount. And somebody's defining it as a problem. And it just isn't obvious who's taking the position to decide what to do about any of it. And you should probably just stick your head in the sand and cherish that, well, if he doesn't have a particular bloodline, you shouldn't be able to do anything about it. And why make like those decisions are real? Because once again, those answers, somebody isn't getting their eyes in there and out and holding the viscosity of those connective tissues stably. It's happening. You've got a dog that's going to show you just how much these answers aren't powerful answers. And then that dog's going to show you how these answers aren't powerful answers. And then what?